I think I have it boosted too fast. Let's change the output down. Apply. Okay, let's see if that works. Alright, welcome back, Crime Spies. That's the first time that's ever happened. But I got a new modem. Oh, yeah. My internet, I had it set way too high. Okay, so let's double check and make sure we're where we're supposed to be. Welcome back, Crime Spies. Please hold one moment. Talk amongst yourselves. Why am I going in here? This is not where I wanted to be. Alright, let's do something else. Why won't my mouse go here? Rumble.com. Oh, that's a weird sound. Okay, so at least it's on over there. Okay, that's good. Now let's open up another YouTube. Boy, I hope that... I did notice today when, we got a weird sound. Okay, well that's just me. Alright, well let's fix that. Alright, so this subcommittee hearing was earlier today, and I didn't do it live because I refused to do anything until I got a new modem. So now I got a new modem. I got it set up. I did a test, and the kilobytes per second was 10,000. So I just went with that, but I don't think where I'm sending it to is capable, so I put it down, and now it looks like we're good. So hopefully that's the end of Crime Spies nincompoopery. So this is the Committee on Homeland Security. No, my mouse won't go over to that other monitor. I must have it set up funny. Oh, for crying in the bucket. So I had set up, I'm going to put this over here. I had set up some filters, and I don't think they're working. Alright, well, you're not here to see me. Come on, now go over there. Hold on a second. FFS. I tell ya. Display. I moved the display over there. Oh, yeah, it didn't set. No, leave it there. Unless my mouse is going rogue. I mean, for Pete's sake.
He will come to order. Without objection, the chair may declare the committee in recess at any point. The purpose of this hearing is to receive testimony on President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas' open border policies and how these failed policies have had a profound and devastating impact throughout our country. This is the second hearing in this committee's impeachment proceedings regarding Secretary Mayorkas. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Last week, this committee opened impeachment proceedings against Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. This is not a policy difference. The truth is, Secretary Mayorkas has disregarded court orders, laws passed by the United States Congress, and has lied to the American people. Who wants a secretary that can just disregard the fundamental pillars of the Constitution? We can't tolerate that, whether they're a Republican or a Democrat. That's what we got out of our hearing last week. Today, we're here to examine the impact of those actions on the American people and launch into the substance and human cost of Secretary Mayorkas' open border policies. As a result of the reckless actions by Secretary Mayorkas, no American is safe. There is a fentanyl epidemic sweeping this nation. Roughly 150,000 Americans died from fentanyl.
Okay, at least your audio or your video is coming in good. I want to say hello to Legend Lurker. Did you see my shirt? I've got my Goat POTUS Never Surrender mugshot shirt on. Hope you like that too. All right, I'm going to test and see if this microphone is hooked up right now. Sorry for all the confusion, you know, for Pete's sake.
Poisoning in 21 and 22. That's more than the number of U.S. combat deaths in World War I and the Vietnam War combined. Fentanyl is ripping apart our families and destroying our communities. Over 50% of this poison is being smuggled from Mexico into Arizona before it's dispersed throughout the United States. The Grand Canyon State is on the front lines of this crisis, which is why we have had testimony by people who have related the impacts on that state. Now, you'll hear many of my colleagues on the left claim that fentanyl is a ports of entry problem. But in reality, just last year, the Border Patrol intercepted enough fentanyl between the ports of entry to kill every single American. And that's just what we've caught. We have no idea how much more fentanyl was brought in by the nearly 1.8 million known gotaways, not to mention the unknown gotaways. Border officials have told this committee in testimony that only 5 to 10% of the fentanyl coming across the border is actually seized. By redirecting so many Border Patrol agents from patrolling the border to assist with the processing and release of illegal aliens, Secretary Mayorkas has made it far easier to smuggle fentanyl across the southwest border. Because of Secretary Mayorkas' border crisis, American cities and neighborhoods are less safe. Secretary Mayorkas' refusal to enforce the law, which requires him to detain and remove illegal aliens, has tragically increased crime and endangered public safety across the country. Since fiscal year 2021, the Border Patrol arrested more than 41,000 aliens with criminal convictions, including more than 15,000 in fiscal year 23. That's up from just a little over 4,200 in FY 2019. Total convictions for assault, battery, and domestic violence among illegal aliens apprehended in FY 23 exceeded 1,200, compared to 299 in FY 19. These statistics do not reflect the illegal aliens with criminal records who have slipped through the system because agents just don't have enough time or information to vet them.
Amazing
Additionally,
disgrace.
DHS has no way to determine if
evening.
an alien has a criminal history in his home country unless
Hopefully
that
we're
country
good now.
reports the
I got a
information to
new
the United States
modem.
government or the alien self-reports. Therefore,
Fingers crossed.
DHS is mainly only screening aliens at the border to determine if they have previously committed a crime in the United States. And because many of these aliens are coming to the United States for the first time, DHS has no idea whether they have a criminal history or not. On top of rushing the vetting process, Secretary Mayorkas is hamstringing ICE, making it easier for illegal aliens who commit crimes in the United States to stay here. Despite his supposed pledge to focus on removing threats to public safety, ICE is arresting fewer illegal aliens than previous administrations. In FY 2019, out of more than 143 administrative arrests, 86% were of criminal aliens. In FY 20, during the COVID-19 pandemic, it was 90%. Last fiscal year, a mere 43%. The consequences of this influx of criminal aliens is simply devastating. Again, as a result, no American is safe. Illegal aliens arriving in major cities like New York and Chicago are committing assault, theft, and even more heinous crimes. In one case, Daniel Hernandez Martinez, who arrived in New York in June 2023, has since committed at least 14 crimes leading to 6 arrests, including the day after he arrived in New York City. In one instance, he, quote, grabbed a stranger by the hair, dragged her across the floor, and kicked her, end quote. Crimes stemming from illegal migrants are also happening in small towns across America. In May 2023, a Honduran national was charged with raping a teenage girl in a restaurant bathroom in Prattsville, Alabama. He had a prior criminal record in Honduras when apprehended, crossing into Texas illegally in November 21, but he was released into the interior anyway. As we learned in last week's hearing, as many as 85% of illegal aliens are currently being released on Secretary Mayorkas' watch. The Secretary himself admitted this during a trip to Eagle Pass just last week. And how could we forget the story of the Tambunga family? Alyssa Tambunga and her father and sister who sat across from us in this very hearing room. Alyssa lost her little 7-year-old Amelia and her grandmother Maria in a car crash caused by a human smuggler. We will sadly hear similar stories today. These crimes were wholly preventable, yet Secretary Mayorkas' policies enabled these criminals to enter our country and destroy these families' lives. It's despicable. While many of my Democrat colleagues likely feel the same sympathy for you and your family that I do, I'd like to ask them to please turn that sympathy into action. It is hypocritical to come up here, offer your thoughts and prayers, and then leave, continuing to double down on the policies that allow criminals and fentanyl into our country. The people suffering from this border crisis don't need platitudes. They need an end to these illegal policies and to see the man responsible for implementing them held to account. And that's what Republicans are doing here today. Migrants are also suffering as a result of Secretary Mayorkas' actions. On Secretary Mayorkas' watch, a record number of migrants have been found dead on U.S. soil. Since the start of FY 2022, CBP no longer even publicly reports the number, but Dr. Corrine Stern, the medical examiner in Webb County, Texas, said in August 22, and I quote, "I'm seeing an extreme increase in the number of border crossing deaths compared to other years. This is my busiest year in my career ever," end quote. Many of those who survived the journey have horror stories as well. Sadly, numerous migrants suffer sexual abuse and assault along the way. Then, San Diego Sector Chief Patrol Agent Aaron Heitke told our committee in May, and I quote, "It's very common that female migrants are raped during the process. Most of them believe it's just part of the payment as they go up," end quote. This hearing is about the human cost of Secretary Mayorkas' egregious misconduct and failure to fulfill his oath of office. The framers of our Constitution were clear that the executive branch officials were expected to follow their duty and enforce the laws of this country, and if they willfully failed to do so, they should no longer hold office. That is why we're here today. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and letting them tell their stories about how this crisis has impacted them. Unfortunately, one of our witnesses, Sheriff Daniels, was not able to make it at the
Clay
last minute.
Higgins on the far
We
left.
look forward to hearing from him at a future hearing
not anymore.
on a future border trip. With his permission, I would ask unanimous consent to submit his testimony for the record. Without objection, so ordered. Lastly, I'd like to point out that I have invited Secretary Mayorkas on multiple occasions to testify on the border crisis, including this hearing today. I'm disappointed that he has chosen not to testify. Instead, he plays games and cat and mouse, telling the media he wants to cooperate with the committee on finding a time to testify, but then refuses to work with the committee staff or offer any dates or times to which he can testify. Despite this behavior, and in lieu of his in-person testimony, I have invited him to submit testimony for the record, and I sincerely hope that he takes advantage of that offer. I'd like to ask unanimous consent for my letters inviting Secretary Mayorkas for testimony dated August 16, September 14, January 5, and January 7th to be entered into the record. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for his opening
Oh, that
statement.
is so weird.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Before we begin today's hearing, I want to address misinformation my Republican colleagues are spreading, falsely alleging that Secretary Mayorkas is refusing to testify before this committee. Let me set the record straight. Secretary Mayorkas has testified before Congress more than any other cabinet secretary. He's appeared before this committee twice in the last year, including just 2 months ago when he testified for several hours about border security. His willingness to work with the committee has been a welcome change from the Trump administration, whose officials consistently refused to comply with congressional oversight. They ignored virtually every oversight letter and even defied a subpoena for their so-called acting secretary to appear before the committee. Secretary Mayorkas, however, has been forthright in dealing with Congress. In response to the chairman's request to testify at today's hearing on January 11th, 2024, the secretary sent a letter agreeing to make himself available to testify at a future mutually agreed-upon date. However, the chairman has refused to accept. Instead, Republicans sent angry letters and tweets accusing the secretary of refusing to testify, knowing full well he said he would appear. Republicans are acting in bad faith. Unfortunately, that's nothing new. Months ago, Chairman Green promised donors at a campaign event that he bring an impeachment case against Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. He told his contributors to, quote, get the popcorn, and promised it's going to be fun, unquote. Before the committee had even begun its inquiry, Republicans had predetermined the outcome. But why did Republicans invite the Secretary to testify only to refuse his offer to appear? The answer to that question appeared in the Hill newspaper last night. Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record this article from the Hill describing how Republicans had set the date for the markup of articles of impeachment before holding the first hearing on this subject.
Without objection, so ordered.
According to an internal Republican memo dated January 10, 2024, Republicans had already scheduled a committee vote to impeach the Secretary prior to holding a single impeachment hearing. Just as we've said all along, the outcome of Republicans' so-called impeachment investigation has been predetermined from the start. The chairman promised to follow the facts, but Republicans never really intended to do so. They are hurrying to adhere to an artificial timeline agreed in a backroom deal between Republican leadership, who's holding on by a thread, and its most extreme MAGA members. This isn't a real impeachment. It's a mega spectacle paid for by American tax dollars for Republican political gain. But through it all, Secretary Mayorkas remained committed to doing his job, the Department of Homeland Security's mission, and the men and women who served with him at DHS. The Secretary is also committed to work diligently on a bipartisan basis to secure necessary funding for border security and to prepare the department for a possible shutdown. I wish my Republican colleagues would engage the Secretary to provide the department the funding it needs, but they have refused. I look forward to continuing to work with Secretary Mayorkas on critical Homeland Security issues facing the country and commend him for his unwavering commitment to duty, even in the face of this sham impeachment. I also note for the record that when I asked at last week's hearing about providing the Secretary due process during the committee's impeachment proceedings, the chairman gave no substantive answers to my repeated inquiries. In fact, he seemed to have even considered providing the Secretary due process and appeared unprepared to respond. This is unfortunate, but not surprising. Again, this isn't a real impeachment. It's a predetermined, pre-planned partisan political stunt. Yesterday, the chairman threatened to hold Secretary Mayorkas in contempt for failing to appear before the committee, even though the Secretary has already agreed to appear. That's not how contempt works. I can't help but wonder if Republicans are getting a bit desperate, especially after their hearing last week was a flop. It fell flat after their witnesses, 3 Republican politicians, rehashed old partisan talking points without so much as a shred of evidence to support their politically motivated claims for impeachment. The Democratic witness, respected impeachment expert and constitutional scholar, Professor Frank Bowman, testified, and I quote, "Policy differences, no matter how severe, no matter how heated, are simply not grounds for impeachment," unquote. You cannot impeach a cabinet secretary because you don't like a president's policies. That's not what impeachment is for. That's not what the Constitution says.
We should be good to go now.
Unfortunately,
I think
Republicans are willing to damage the
got both
Constitution
chats up.
they claim to hold dear because they think it will benefit them politically. Which brings us to today's hearing. I want to begin by expressing my deepest sympathies to Mrs. Noble and Mrs. Dunn
drop
on the tragic
frames.
loss
Good.
of your children. I cannot fathom your pain. As a father and a grandfather, my heart truly goes out to you.
Okay, hopefully this
Indeed, our
works.
hearts go out to all those who've
Fingers
lost loved
crossed.
ones
I got the
to drugs and violence. And
filters.
we are committed to helping prevent future tragedies. Democrats
Crazy looking hair.
want to strengthen border security. We want to keep fentanyl off our streets.
Got some new
We
yarn.
want to keep communities safe. We want to help those struggling with addiction. But impeachment will not do any of that. The fact is, impeachment is a waste of precious time.
Oh, get
that
on
could
with
be
it, Mr.
used to
Thompson.
legislate on the urgent issues if only Republicans were willing to do. The Democratic witness today, Professor Deborah Pearlstein, is a constitutional law scholar. But in addition to her knowledge of impeachment, she's great expertise
Amazing
on the awesome
Disgrace
power
said, I've
vested in
heard some
Congress by
of-
the Constitution to effect change for the American people.
Amazing Disgrace says, I've heard some of this. Get ready for TDS extravaganza. Ooh. There was one yesterday I really wanted to do also that pertained to the immigration law, but I just couldn't couldn't manage to get a connection. So that's why today that was on my list to go get a new modem.
Constitution and
So
executive
hopefully I
branch,
can do a rewatch
unquote.
of that tomorrow.
Instead, Congress' power comes from its ability to legislate. As Professor Pearlstein goes on to say, quote, "No branch of government has more power under our Constitution to address matters of border security than Congress," unquote. In other words, it's up to Congress to provide funding to interdict fentanyl, fix our broken immigration system, and provide help for those suffering from opioid addiction. That's our role in this.
So for those of
Use
you
the
who
power
know,
provided under the Constitution to legislate on important issues
gonna bump
to
him
help
up.
people who need it most, and not some baseless, senseless impeachment. I look forward to hearing from Professor Pearlstein about Congress's power to
I
make meaningful
am-
progress on these and other issues. Mr. Chairman, I made this plea to you last week. It fell on deaf ears, but I'll try again. Let's drop this baseless impeachment and get back to doing the real work of securing the homeland and helping people across this great country.
Okay, this
Before I yield
guy,
back, Mr. Chairman, I have a
Mr.
parliamentary
Thompson,
inquiry.
he can
I'd like
never
to
have
give you
two
another
thoughts
chance
to rub
because-
together of his own.
You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, during our hearing last week, you said, quote, "The committee will follow the rules of the House," end quote, with regard to Secretary Mayorkas' due process. What provisions of House Rule 11 grants the Secretary representation before this committee?
I do have to turn on my heater, I think. This wall is outward facing and gets a lot of wind. It's not pretty windy today. We still haven't
Just
had
a question
much
of
snow.
clarification on the parliamentary proceeding. What rule are you citing?
Rule 11.
Rule 11. The Secretary is not appearing before the committee today, so his counsel is not necessary.
Mr. Chairman, we all know that Secretary Mayorkas has been willing to appear before this committee. He's not running from anything. He's been to the Capitol Hill 27 times since he was sworn in. My question is about due process, and there's nothing in the standing House rules that protects the Secretary's rights. So, Mr. Chairman, pursuant to Clause 2J1 of Rule 11, I'm furnishing you with a demand for a Minority Day hearing on this subject, signed by all the Democratic members of this committee.
Oh, goody.
So
Once
the
we get
demand is
to-
not proper. You have a witness present, so. Before, right?
Yeah, this is the
Once we
unanimous
get to a
consent.
normal
They include in the record the article, but also
case
I
here,
have this request for the,
You want this included in the record? Is that what you're asking?
well, that's a request.
we will put the
for minority
speed down
day
to
for the committee.
1.25. This is for like 4-ish hours.
So as I understand the rules, the request is only in order when you don't have a witness present, and today you have a witness present, so this is not in order.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a parliamentary inquiry on that?
Yeah.
Is this an impeachment inquiry?
You want to read the request? Yeah, this is actually a hearing, not an inquiry.
Is this part of an impeachment investigation?
No.
This is an impeachment
People
hearing.
are there to.
Okay. Under impeachment precedent, separate and apart from this particular hearing,
These people.
the minority is allowed to have a hearing of its own choice and its own witnesses. That has happened in every single impeachment in history. If this is going to be an impeachment process, then there have to be rights and due process afforded to the individual who is being impeached. And part of that, historically, under historic precedent, is that there is a minority day with minority-determined witnesses, not a minority witness who's added to a hearing that the majority determines.
So I want to make clear this supposed misinformation about the request of Secretary Mayorkas. There have been multiple requests, 4 in fact, of me to ask him to come and be a part of this. And he has, to the press, said yes, to me, not provided any dates, at some date in the future. You can't, that's stonewalling. And so at some point after 4, I finally said, I guess it was Monday, well, just send us a testimony in writing. So far, we haven't seen that either. The effort to give Secretary Mayorkas an opportunity to come before the committee in this context has been made many times. I appreciate that the ranking member pointed out that he has been in front of our committee, but that was mandated by, the threats briefing. That's what he came for, was the threats briefing, not a part of this investigation on the southwest border. Every time we've invited him, he has refused to give us a date to come. So he's been afforded an opportunity to come.
I understand that, and that's a separate issue, whether or not Mr. Mayorkas wants to take part in his own impeachment inquiry. But the question for you is that as part of the House impeachment process, there must be afforded to the minority a hearing that the minority gets to determine, because it's an impeachment process. It is not a normal oversight investigation. What Secretary Mayorkas wants to do is a separate matter. I understand your view, and I understand the ranking member has a different view. I'm sure we will get all of the different letters in the record, and I have an article here saying that the DHS letter contradicts the GOP claim that Mayorkas refused to testify, which I could enter by unanimous consent. But we're just talking right now about the impeachment process, and in this committee, where it has never been done before, it's normally in the Judiciary Committee, that there has to be a minority day with minority-determined witnesses.
I appreciate the letter, and we'll take it into consideration. And Mr. Ranking Member, you're recognized for the remainder of your opening statement.
Well, let me ask unanimous consent that that be included in the record. The
Without
request.
objection, so ordered.
So, Mr. Chairman, Rule 11 does not mention anything about having a minority witness at any given hearing. It only provides for a minority day. I refer the chair to page 599 of the House Rules Manual.
This guy can read really good. They just keep putting shit in front of him to read. There's witnesses here that are here to testify. It's my understanding about some horror they've had to endure with this open
Were you asking
border
a question?
problem. And these
I mean, we
guys
didn't ask
and
about a witness, we
ladies,
asked for a date.
Yes, I saw the letter. We've entered it into the record. and we
I've
want to
just had
continue this
enough
hearing.
of
We'll address that
them.
later.
No,
with
well,
all their
Mr.
garbage
Chairman, this
over
committee
and
cannot
over and over and
proceed,
over again.
to any marker. I know you have long planned in which you committed to the speaker and to a member of this committee behind closed doors without a full hearing of the merits of impeachment. But a minority day on an impeachment is allowed by the rules.
Thank you.
And so we're just trying to,
No, I appreciate you
do
mentioning.
you plan to honor that?
We're going to take it into consideration, and I'll meet with you later to talk about it.
Well,
I mean, do you have any other comments for your opening remarks?
it's a simple request. It's in the rules, and we just want the rules to be followed.
There's an interpretation disagreement on this. Our parliamentarian says that you're entitled to witnesses and not a specific hearing. We'll take a look at it after this, and you and I can talk about it then.
Yeah. Mr. Ranking Member, will you yield for a question? I just want to make
No,
sure, 'cause I don't
let's
think it
get
was
to
entered
the
into record before.
witnesses.
The Ranking Member referred to the letter that Council Secretary Mayorkas sent to the committee on January 11th.
If I could, Mr. Magaziner, this is his opening statement, not his 5 minutes. He can yield time to you in his 5 minutes.
Okay, I was just going to ask unanimous consent that the letter be entered into the record.
Okay, why
I'm
don't you
fine
just
with
shut
that.
the hell up
We'll
so these
break
people
protocol here
can
in just a
speak?
second. If there's no objection, so ordered. Mr. Ranking Member, you're recognized.
I'm in no mood for this.
The Ranking Member yields.
Although
Thank
I
you.
am really
Other members of
happy
the committee
right
are
now
reminded
with
that opening
this.
statements may be submitted for the record. I'm pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today. I ask that our
Live
witnesses
stream
please
so far
rise
looks like
and
so
raise their
far
right
so
hand.
good on the new modem. Absolutely no drop frames.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
54
Let the record
kilobytes per
reflect that the witnesses have
second.
answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may be
Good,
seated.
good.
I would now like to formally introduce our witnesses. Ms. Tammy Nobles. Ms. Nobles is the mother of a young Maryland woman, Kyla Hamilton, who was raped and murdered in July 2022,
This is going to be so sad.
allegedly by a 17-year-old El Salvador native and MS-13 member who had illegally crossed the southwest border in March 2022.
I also wanted to say, too, for those of you that remember that beautiful mother of, I think she was the mom of like 4 or 5 kids out in, was it Maryland? Rachel Marin. She was murdered. The DNA from her crime scene matched a man of Hispanic origin 6 months earlier, 5 months earlier from California. Now, I'm not saying that he's an illegal immigrant, but, you know, California, and then all of a sudden 5 months later his DNA was found in California on the SA of a young girl, and then 5 months later he's all the way the hell over across the country. So these women here are here to testify about some terrible things.
As an unaccompanied alien child. Ms. Dunn is an Arizona mother who lost her 26-year-old daughter, Ashley Dunn, to fentanyl poisoning in 2021.
Now here's
Since
a
her daughter's
fentanyl one.
passing, Josephine has become an advocate working to stem the scourge that fentanyl is wrecking in the United
This is
States.
gonna be bad.
Ms. Deborah Pearlstein is the director of the Princeton Program in Law and Public Policy and Charles and Marie Robertson Visiting Professor of Law and Public Affairs. Before joining Princeton, she was professor of law and co-director of the Florsheim Center for Constitutional Democracy at Cardozo Law School, Yeshiva University, and held visiting appointments at the University of Pennsylvania Law School and Georgetown University Law Center. I thank all the witnesses for being here today, and I now recognize Ms. Nobles for 5 minutes to summarize her opening
Oh,
statement.
I'm going to be quiet.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Tammy Nobles. I am the mother of Kayla Hamilton. July 24, 2002 was one of the best days of my life. I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl and named her Kayla Marie. She loved to smile and laugh. She always kept her friends close and never forgot anyone. She was kind, caring, thoughtful, and funny. She loved God. She loved life and God. She showed the world that being yourself was okay and you didn't have to follow everyone else. But sadly, on July 27th, 2022, I received the worst news that a parent doesn't want to hear, that my newly 20-year-old daughter, Kayla Hamilton, was murdered in her own room and left on the floor like trash. The illegal MS-13 known gang member brutally raped and murdered my daughter by strangling her with a cord and robbed her of $6. During the attack, Kayla called her boyfriend for help, but went to voicemail. The voicemail of the murderer strangling Kayla was 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. DHS employees failed to visually inspect the assailant by lifting his shirt to check for gang-related tattoos. Had DHS employees performed a visual inspection of the assailant's body, they would have seen MS-13 gang-related tattoos on his body, disqualifying him from entering the U.S. DHS employees failed to make a simple phone call to the El Salvador government to verify if assailant was on an MS-13 gang affiliation list. Had they done so, El Salvador government officials would have confirmed that the assailant was a known MS-13 gang member with a prior criminal history. DHS supervisors have failed to train and supervise DHS employees to properly screen minors attempting to enter U.S. soil from El Salvador. The operational neglect committed by DHS carried over into DHS, whose operational neglect further sealed my daughter's fate. DHHS's operational neglect included its employees violating clearly articulated protocol requiring a minor to be placed with a verified relative before entering the U.S. DHHS employees neglected and recklessly failed to verify a legitimate family member of the assailant or sponsor before allowing him to enter U.S. soil. There were clear inconsistencies in the DHS and DHHS records regarding the identity of the relative to whom the assailant was released. Ultimately, DHHS's failures, the MS-13 gang member as a minor, to rent a room in a trailer park from another individual who was also an illegal immigrant. There was also a lack of transparency by DHS and DHHS, including but not limited to DHHS failure to provide House of Representative Chairman Jim Jordan a copy of its audit report. Let's take a moment and think about how Kayla felt that day, how scared she must have been that day knowing that she was dying, if she was going to see her mommy again, her baby sister, her brother, or her cat Oreo. Kayla fought for her life that day with all that she had, and in the end, she lost to an individual that wasn't even supposed to be allowed in the country. For me, this is not a political issue. This is a safety issue for everyone living in the United States. This could have been anyone's daughter. I don't want any other parent to live the nightmare that I am living. I am her voice now, and I'm going to fight with everything I have to get her story told and bring awareness of the issue at the border. If we had stricter border policies, my daughter would still be alive today. Nothing will bring my daughter back nor fix the pain of not having her here. I don't want to prevent this from happening to someone else's child. This isn't about immigration. This is about protecting everyone in the United States.
Thank you, Ms. Nobles.
God,
I now
I can't even
recognize Ms.
imagine.
Dunn for 5 minutes to summarize her opening statement.
I put some filters on the video.
Before I begin,
I'll be quiet.
I wish to thank you all for the gift of your time. I want to thank you for allowing me to share my beautiful daughter's story. As painful as it is for me to do so, I wish to spare as many parents the unfathomable pain and debilitating grief that I carry every single day. My daughter Ashley has left this earth 967 days ago. Today would have been her 29th birthday. In the next 5 minutes, you will see many beautiful photos of Ashley on the screens. Photos are all that my family and I have left of her. That's not true. I guess we do have a small amount of ashes in an urn, and we do have our memories. In that same 5 minutes that I get to share her story after I traveled all the way from Arizona for Mr. Mayorkas not to appear here today, Someone else's loved one in the United States will die in this same 5 minutes that I get to speak because of fentanyl. Over the next 24 hours, 190 loved ones in this country will die from fentanyl. 50% of that fentanyl is coming through my state with an open border. The beautiful state of Arizona today will lose 5 people to fentanyl. 5.
You see, Arizona recognizes that fentanyl
Is a weapon of mass destruction. While you see her beautiful smile and almond-shaped eyes scroll across those screens, more often than not, I remember her differently. Every time I close my eyes, I see all of the tubes. When it's quiet, I hear all of the machines that were keeping her alive. You see, my husband and I had to sit for 86 hours in the ICU while we were begging God, because yes, we're Christians and we're conservative, we're from Arizona. We were begging God, we were pleading God, bargaining that she would just breathe. Over the last 32 months, Ashley did not celebrate her son's 5th, 6th, or 7th birthday. She did not watch her baby graduate from kindergarten. She did not celebrate Christmas or Thanksgiving, nor did we as a family. I'm sure you guys did. So she celebrated the last of her birthdays when she was 26. She will forever be 26. Before you decide how you feel about my family and about fentanyl, understand that fentanyl affects all walks of life. By the time my testimony is over, please know that one person will have died. Ashley had brown hair and the most beautiful eyes. Ashley, with one smile, would steal your heart. Ashley had a kind heart and a gentle soul. I understand that the mission of the Department of Homeland Security is to secure our nation's air, land, and sea borders, to prevent illegal activity while facilitating lawful travel and trade. In my humble opinion, Mr. Mayorkas' border policies is partially responsible for my daughter's death. His wide open border policy allows massive quantities of poisonous fentanyl into our country. Arizona is the fentanyl superhighway into the United States. I personally feel Mr. Mayorkas is responsible for opening that border to allow more than 10 million illegal border crossings since February of 2021, which supports most of the illegal fentanyl into this country. This weapon of mass destruction has killed over 100,000 Americans on our soil for 2 years in a row. Under Secretary Mayorkas' leadership, or lack thereof, fentanyl is an invasion. The weapon of mass destruction has caused unimaginable numbers of deaths, unmeasurable damage to our country's families, including my own. My family is broken. My heart is broken, and he couldn't even be here to face me today. Whatever he's doing that is more important than facing me today, I don't know what that could be. Our country deserves a secure border. Our country deserves to feel safe. Our country deserves to be free of fentanyl. We need to close the fentanyl superhighway. We need to close the border. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn.
God,
I now
that is
recognize
so
Ms. Perlstein
horrible.
for 5 minutes to summarize her opening statement.
Before we get moving with this, hold close in your mind the 2 women that just spoke. This last witness is some kind of professor. Now, I don't mean to disparage, but usually the left side of the aisle likes to bring a buffer in, let's just say. So as this hearing continues, just kind of keep that in mind. These 2 women, their heartbreak, and like Mimsy said, she had this second witness here. It's a weapon of mass destruction. Well said. Totally true. This is why I watch these. And now hopefully I won't miss any more because we're screaming demon now. Hooray. Benjamin Gray, fentanyl has its uses only under controlled situations, though. I feel, though, that there are other pressures that lead to the use of drug cut with fentanyl. I've read that it may come TBC. Okay, so here, Benjamin, the through but not produced by bordering countries. Okay, so the other day I had mentioned there's been a lot of hearings on the border, and justly so. But there was one several months ago. It might have even actually been in the summertime, and they had said there was a father there that had talked about his son who wanted to spend one more night with his fraternity brothers. He had gotten a job. He graduated from college, got a job, was just had to do like a phone orientation type thing. And apparently he went on Snapchat, and I think he bought a Xanax, because apparently Snapchat is where they find their, drug dealers. I don't know. And that Xanax was laced with fentanyl. So, I mean, there's a multitude of problems here. And so he didn't make it for that, like video orientation thing with his new employer. And then his, fraternity brothers, come home from whatever. And, it's like the afternoon, and they noticed he was dead. It's just terrible.
Thank you very much, Chairman Green, Ranking Member
I turn my
Thompson,
heater on.
members of the
Just
committee.
a moment.
Thank you for
Hi,
the invitation to
Christine.
participate in the committee's consideration of whether
So not
constitutional
Xanax.
grounds exist to impeach Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas. I've been a professor of constitutional law for more than a decade, director of 2 different academic centers focused on the study of constitutional.
I wanted to say it isn't Xanax. They're manufactured pills to look like Xanax, but they're laced with fentanyl. And actually, somewhere, I think, actually, this might be a good thing to put up here. Hold on one moment. I pulled this up last week. I suppose I don't have to, I can find it. Okay, I'll have to look for it. But there's a picture I pulled up last week with a penny, and it has like a couple little dots on the penny. That's how much fentanyl it takes to kill a human being. Okay, I'll be right back. I gotta turn on my heater. I'm cold.
I've studied, written, and taught about the unique role impeachment plays in our system of government. As a mother and a former human rights lawyer, I couldn't take the subject matter in front
And
of the
we're at
committee today more
1.25
seriously.
times speed. I think
My
that's a good
expertise,
speed
however,
for
is in the field
this.
of constitutional law, not in immigration policy as such, and my testimony, solely in my personal capacity, is thus limited to questions of constitutional authority that are relevant here. While my written statement goes into greater detail, in these few minutes I'd like to highlight just 2 points. First, impeachment is a narrow remedy for a specific kind of misconduct limited by the Constitution to addressing offenses against our system of government that cannot be solved through ordinary channels of redress. Second, no branch of government has more power under our Constitution to address matters of border security than Congress. Although the framers of the U.S. Constitution were convinced that impeachment would have to be retained from the British regime they had just overthrown as a remedy against the most egregious offenses of public officers, they were determined to limit the scope of the power to ensure it remained consistent with the new design of our constitutional democracy. Central to our system is this principle of separation of powers. Each branch of government remains independent, with none empowered to fully control the members of the others. Because impeachment was a potentially dangerous exception to that overriding principle, the framers significantly narrowed the scope of the impeachment power as it existed under the law of the king. Above all, the framers significantly narrowed the grounds for which officials could be impeached. And as now, treason and bribery were recognized as the most serious offenses against a system of government in which the American people were asked to entrust elected leaders with acting in their interest. Treason was a betrayal of the interests of the American people in favor of the interests of a foreign enemy. Bribery involved a public official placing his own interests in personal power and enrichment above the interests of the public. By labeling the other category, other high crimes and misdemeanors, the framers signaled that they meant to include only those offenses that posed a similarly severe threat, not to a particular area of public policy, but to the very system of government that depends on officials acting in good faith on behalf of the people who place them in office. Policy differences could be addressed through elections. Impeachment was to be, and largely has been, a last-ditch mechanism to address offenses against constitutional democracy by a single individual that can't be adequately addressed through ordinary channels of government. Second point, The first and most important remedy the Constitution provides to address perceived failings of the president and the executive branch remains the separation of powers, including Congress's authority to effect policy change itself. When it comes to immigration in particular, the Supreme Court has long described congressional power in the field as plenary. Article 1 of the Constitution grants Congress the power to set the terms and conditions by which a foreign national may become a U.S. citizen, sweeping authorities to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, the power to make all laws necessary and proper for carrying out these duties. And Article 1, Section 9 gives Congress the exclusive power over how the U.S. government allocates its resources. These vast powers, which the Constitution sets out in its very first article, remain among our democracy's most fundamental checks on the exercise of executive power. Despite these vast reserves of constitutional authority, a spike in partisan polarization in recent decades, a refusal to work across partisan lines to solve common problems, has meant the power to address pressing national problems has gone unused. Nowhere has this effect been more apparent than in Congress's failure to develop national policy on immigration. Despite all that has changed, the last significant piece of comprehensive immigration legislation to pass Congress with bipartisan support was in 1986. The action under consideration here, impeachment, isn't a tool of policy change, particularly the impeachment of a single cabinet official who can be replaced by another official given precisely the same role, will have no effect on the heartbreaking problems we have heard described. Without taking a position on the wisdom of any particular bill now under consideration, I understand that multiple pieces of bipartisan legislation are today pending in the House, very active negotiations underway in the Senate. The framers of the Constitution well understood the acute difficulty of embracing compromise with their domestic political opponents, or for the purpose of actually addressing the needs and easing the pain of the people who live in this country, the framers of the Constitution thought that no one in government could do more to make a real difference than you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pearlstein. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Ms. Pearlstein, in 2019 on a New York Public Radio podcast, you were asked what you took away from a congressional hearing on impeachment standards. Your response was as follows.
So this is an exchange that came out of and really belonged in the panel in which the constitutional law professors were appearing. And there, the professors were reasonably uniform, right, in recognizing that it doesn't have to be a crime, that is to say an impeachable offense, doesn't have to be a crime as currently embodied in the federal criminal code as enacted by Congress. The existing criminal laws didn't exist when the framers wrote the Constitution. And indeed, crimes as such weren't what the framers had in mind when they put impeachment into the Constitution. What they were thinking about with the impeachment remedy were serious offenses against the public trust. That is, certain things that only the president and other senior officials could do that abused their authority. In other words, the idea of abuse of power is sort of the death.
Do you still stand by those words? Yes, just a yes or no quick question.
It is absolutely the case. The Congress doesn't have to show a violation of Title 18 of the U.S. Code. It has to show that there was a high crime or misdemeanor.
Reclaiming my time, I think the words that are very interesting to me is serious offenses against the public trust. Ms. Nobles, Ms. Dunn, do you think that our open border policies, which have allowed fentanyl to pour into this country, 1.8 million gotaways, unknown gotaways, is an offense against the public trust of this country?
Yes, definitely.
Ms. Dunn? Yes. Ms. Nobles, the committee has been focused, well, first, before I ask your question, one of the things that was very interesting in your opening statement, Ms. Pearlstein, was about the power of separation, the separation of powers. And you talk about Congress having the remedy to make laws to fix the immigration issue and the border issue. But see, we passed a law that says shall detain. Mr. Mayorkas has basically completely reversed that. So you're right, we could pass more laws. In fact, we tried, we passed H.R. 2, but it won't pass the Senate because they refused to take it up. But yes, we have the power to pass more laws. They're not even following the laws that are already written. And that, from my standpoint, is basically a refusal to understand the separation of power, that we write the laws and they enforce them. But the Secretary doesn't seem to care about that, nor does he seem to care about the 4 court orders, which have told him he's doing that and said cease and desist with these policies that are absolutely subverting the law, and he refused to follow those court orders. Ms. Nobles, the committee has been focused on the Biden administration's refusal to secure our southwest border and vet alien arrivals. A report from the House Judiciary Committee pointed out multiple vetting failures with your daughter's killer. Its report shows that your daughter's murderer was arrested for association with the MS-13 well before he came to the United States, something the United States officials verified easily after the murder occurred. The report also noted that the alien was released after he was arrested for murder. Do you think that Secretary Mayorkas has done an adequate job of vetting illegal aliens coming across our southern border?
No. And may I say that it took the local detectives to find out that he was an MS-13 gang member. Homeland Security and Department of Health and Human Services did not know that until after he killed my daughter. And then they tried to write it in there after the fact, but it was already let out.
So for those of you
they
who
failed to know that he was an MS-13 gang member.
For those of you who are not familiar with the MS-13, I think you all are. When they kill someone, it's meant to be torture. They use machetes and big giant knives as their weapon of choice.
Ms. Dunn, do you believe Secretary Mayorkas genuinely cares about the well-being and safety of U.S. citizens like your daughter, considering that his actions are directly responsible for aggravating and fueling the ongoing fentanyl crisis?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. I yield. I now recognize the ranking member for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much. Let me say from the outset, every opportunity to provide resources.
I'm going to start
for the
throwing
Department
things with these
Homeland
guys.
Security. Democrats on this committee have always given them what they've asked. The majority of Republicans on this committee, they've not given them resources. So when we interview people in the department, the number one issue that comes up is we need more resources, technology, sometimes manpower, sometimes just the ability to interdict. And that is what we've tried to provide on a regular basis. And I encourage my colleagues that when the next opportunity comes to fund the department, let's listen to the men and women who work in the department who say they need the resources.
This is another one of their talking points. We need more money.
Professor Pearlstein, last week, you joined 24 of the country's most knowledgeable constitutional lawyers on a bipartisan letter. The Speaker,
Okay, I'm
John.
going to try not to pause this very often, but this is another thing that really gets underneath my skin. They're going to, the left side of the aisle is going to talk to the professor. Mark my words, their talking points are going to deal with the fact that we need to revise our immigration laws to allow people to come in here legally, more people to come in here legally. And I bet you they're not even going to ask those two mothers questions. The two mothers are going to be questioned by the members on the right side of the aisle. And briefly, I also wanted to thank those of you who took the poll I put up last week. And I had asked if you normally watch House Subcommittee hearings. And it was like 80% of people said no, they don't listen to it. And there was like 17 people that took that poll. So I like to watch these. I usually only do House Judiciary, Oversight Committee, and Homeland Security. That's what this one is. But a lot of times this is the only way you're going to get the truth about what's really happening. And I do encourage people from both sides of the political aisle. I mean, granted, I'm wearing the Go POTUS impeachment shirt, but for people of both sides of the political aisle to listen to this, because if you're only getting your news from mainstream media, newspapers, local television, national television, you're not going to hear these stories that these women just talked, their opening statements. You're not going to hear that. It's so disgusting.
Green,
and they're two people of how many?
Against Secretary Mayorkas is unjustified as a matter of constitutional law. Can you explain in simple terms why you and your colleagues concluded that impeaching the secretary is unjustified under the Constitution?
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Yes, the term high crimes and misdemeanors, which is what's at issue.
We just had this impeachment inquiry last week about Mayorkas. That was that hearing. This hearing is called Voices for the Victims, the heartbreaking reality of Mayorkas's border. Oh, I should have picked up some alcohol on my way
Here is a
home.
limited term
I
of
never
art.
drink, but
It includes only those offenses against the system of government, not ordinary crimes, offenses against the structure of government comparable to treason and bribery, offenses that interfere in the way the government works. The allegations that have been set forth here, which are very serious, are profound complaints about the policies that the current secretary has pursued. They're policies that the secretary has pursued under the current president of the United States, who appointed the secretary and was elected to pursue those policies. Policy differences, and I agree with my colleague at the last hearing, no matter how profound, are exactly not what impeachment was meant to be for. The framers were very worried that impeachment would become something like a tool of the parliamentary system, so that Congress could, in essence, hold the president and the president's administration on a leash. The framers wanted each branch to remain independent, to make their own policy judgments, so that their ambition could counteract ambition, and they would fight each other on democratic terms over what the right answer was.
Thank you very much. I also want to talk to you about how Republicans and Democrats on this committee can work together to strengthen border security and address the opioid crisis. Democrats agree about the need for action to help families like those on our panel today and prevent further tragedies. Professor, in your testimony, you say, and I quote, "The first and most important remedy the Constitution provides to address perceived failings of the president and executive branch remains the separation of powers, including Congress's constitutional authority to effect policy change itself." In other words, if the Congress doesn't like what an administration is doing, the Constitution gives its power to pass laws to direct a different course of action. Can you explain the power Congress has under the Constitution to effect change?
Thank you. Congress has the most power of any branch in the government to effect change. It has, under Article 1, the exclusive power to spend any money and allocate resources on behalf of the United States. It also has the other powers that I listed in my opening remarks. And critically, while it does have the power to pass laws, sweeping laws, it is also subject to the rule of the Supreme Court, which has, in the allegations at issue here, twice rejected the arguments that were noted by the chairman moments ago, that in fact there was a violation of law here. Those laws remain on the books, and Congress can do additional things, principally through funding, but not exclusively, to make them even stronger.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, House Committee on Foreign Affairs, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this powerful hearing. I was a federal prosecutor. I was Deputy Attorney General for the state of Texas for criminal justice. I worked with the victims of crime. That's what we do. And we talk a lot about facts and figures, about the border, statistics. But your stories are the most powerful because they're real life stories about the impact of this man's violation of the public trust. And I agree with your podcast that it doesn't have to be a federal statute because they didn't have a lot of federal statutes when the Founding Fathers were at the Constitutional Convention. In fact, the Supreme Court recently held that impeachment is a tool Congress can use to hold this secretary accountable. It's the legal justification. I believe he's violated his oath. He's violated the public trust. He's violated your daughters. I intend to personally uphold my oath to my country that I took in office. It's been a dereliction of duty of the grossest proportions I've seen in my 25 years of dealing with this border. Ms. Dunn, I couldn't agree. Fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction. I passed a bill out of my committee defining it as such. It comes from China, and they make it in Mexico, and they kill our children here, 200,000, more than Vietnam, World War II. My children have been to 6 funerals now. I've seen it personally. The destruction it does every 5 minutes. It is a fentanyl superhighway. And this border policy is personally responsible for it. He took an oath to defend and protect the Constitution and the American people, air, land, and sea from enemies, foreign and domestic. Ms. Dunn, do you believe he violated that oath?
Yes, sir. I flew from Arizona to meet him and face him and ask him why. And he's not here today. I did not know that until after I landed yesterday.
And he doesn't have the decency
No.
to even show up
That is correct.
and talk to you personally.
Today is my daughter's birthday. I would have much rather been home with my poor husband grieving her. I didn't need to be here today. So whatever he's doing, I hope it's more important than that.
Let me say I'm sorry,
Thank you.
because apparently the secretary doesn't care to show up and say that to you.
No.
Do you know he's meeting with Mexican officials today?
Exactly.
How does that make you feel?
Oh, you have no idea how I feel.
I'll be meeting with Mexican officials later next week, and I'm gonna have a different story for them. I'm gonna have your story that I will take to them. Ms. Nobles, God, you know, these gangbangers come in and they join trafficking organizations. They're being sent to families that don't exist because it's a trafficking organization in the United States. This one man who deserves impeachment has created a criminal enterprise in the United States of America. 8 million encounters. What are we gonna do with all these millions of people with no legal status who can't get a real job? So what do? It's drugs, gangbanging, murder. I've seen it in my career, and they're the worst. And it sickens me what happened to your daughter, and you must relive it in your head every single day, what she went through, what your poor daughter had to experience that day. Do you hold Mr. Mayorkas personally accountable for the death of your daughter?
Yes, I do.
I do too. And that's why he needs to be impeached. Do you hold him personally accountable for what he did? Do you hold him personally accountable for the policies he established, which violated the public trust and ended up in the death of your daughter?
Yes.
And yet he doesn't have the decency or the guts to show up to you today and say, I'm sorry. Did he?
No, he did not. I mean, she was killed 3 days after her 20th birthday. She spent 3 days being 20. And I sent her a message on her birthday on July 24th that I was proud of the woman that she was becoming and that I love her. And I didn't know that would be my last message to telling her that I love her. She even bought herself, I gave her the money to buy her a JoJo Suya cake because that is who she loved. And she had autism and she loved JoJo. And her life was brutally taken and she had no idea what to expect that day when she went to bed after getting off the night shift of work and went to sleep in her own bed and had no idea what was going to happen on July 27th.
Let me just close by saying I have a daughter that is your daughter's age. She has a cat named Snickers. I know your daughter had a cat named Oreo. This is the personal side of this chaos created by this man. This is a personal life story of the cause and effect that has happened because of these failed policies on the border. It's destruction and it's death, and it has to stop. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
As a mother, I would like to begin by offering my sincere condolences to Ms. Dunn and Ms. Nobles for the devastating losses that they and their families have experienced. No amount of sympathy and thank yous
Wow,
can
that was nice,
compensate
Miss Jackson
for
Lee.
the loss. No one should ever have to experience the loss of a child. So please know that we are committed to making
Let's
our
pay
community
attention and see if
safer
anybody
and
else.
combating the heinousness of drug trafficking and other violence that comes for those that should not be in this country and should not take advantage of the innocent people who are here, which includes your children. Mr. Chairman, the stories of Ms. Dunn and Ms. Nobles are gut-wrenching. They are clearly,
I mean,
for any
you
of
would think
us,
that this would
we
be a
cannot stand in their
bipartisan
shoes,
thing.
No matter how much we try to empathize, try to seem like we are standing in their shoes, try to use language that would create hysteria to seem like we have the same pain. No one can express the pain that a parent that has lost a child can feel. It is gut-wrenching. But you brought them here, unfortunately, where our solutions may not be the solutions that they seek. Under the false pretense that impeaching Secretary Mayorkas would be in any
Oh,
way
no.
prevent what
Miss
happened to their
Jackson
children
Lee, you
from happening
started
to
off
someone
on
else's.
such a good note, and here we
It
go.
wouldn't, and I think you know that. What is worse is that the Republicans on this committee are not leveling with Americans about the actions that they have taken or not taken
Oops,
to
that's
secure
not
the
what I
border
wanted to
and
do.
combat drug trafficking. The truth is, at every opportunity, Republicans
See,
at the
they
federal and
just
state
can't
level
help
have pursued
themselves.
politics over policy and obstructed efforts to improve conditions at the border. We need more resources. We need more skilled personnel. We need more ways to keep bad guys out of here to ensure the protection of the innocent. precious children of these two mothers. In Washington, all but 9 of my Republican colleagues voted against the FY 2023 omnibus, which provided much-needed increases on substance abuse protection funding to increase personnel.
Miss Jackson Lee has led you astray. She started off like actually doing something nice and acknowledging the 2 women that are there to testify in their grief. And now she's going off her little script that's been prepared for her by probably one of those, interns behind her. And here's one of our distractions. We are wasting time on impeaching Secretary Mayorkas. That might be true, but, at this point, it's not that much longer till the election, and who knows what they'll put in, who they'll put in, to replace him, probably be as bad. But, for those of you who have been watching these subcommittee hearings for several years, I had to live through 2 whole congressional things, 4 years of them impeaching Goat POTUS 45. So that's talking point number 1. Talking point number 2, border policies are outdated. We need to upgrade our border policies so that we can allow more legal immigrants in here, and then we aren't going to have the problem. Wrong. I think our border or immigration policies or immigration laws, point blank, you have to vet these people. You can't just let them run across the friggin' border. Maybe if you would have let the rest of the border wall, ma'am, get built instead of they paid people not to build the wall when 46 came into office. Paid them. I forget how much it was. 3rd talking point, they're going to need more money for the border. They need more money for border agents. No, that's what they say. But what they're doing is the border agents that are supposed to be patrolling the border and arresting the illegals, which probably wouldn't be crossing if the border wall would have gotten finished instead of rotting in the sunshine. They're there to help people change diapers, help little kids change their diapers, etc. Sheila Jackson Lee, I thought for a second there you might have had a heart, but I guess I was wrong.
Along the border and improve.
Benjamin Gray, they already built ladders that go over the border wall. Oh, goody.
Fentanyl detection. Republicans have refused to act on the president's supplement request, sitting right here, waiting for us to act, which would provide additional resources, not only for CBP, but also for communities receiving migrants. And instead of considering policies to improve security along the border or prevent drug trafficking,